facing adversity. And in retrospect, the adversity that students at Kansas Wesleyan have faced during the past year is almost staggering. 4 months after the tragedy that Paula faced, other international students suffered tragedy at home. Friday, March 11th at 2:46 p.m., the greatest earthquake since records began hit Japan. In Tokyo, skyscrapers started shaking like trees. Oil tanks ruptured. Refineries burst into flames. 186-mile-an-hour bullet trains ground to a halt. Cell phone networks fell silent. A pall of smoke hung over the capital, home to 13 million people. Thousands of commuters gasped as underground trains swayed, groaning in tunnels. Airports closed. In nuclear plants, which provide a third of the energy in oil-starved Japan, technicians raced to shut down reactors. At the 40-year-old Fukushima reactors, an explosion blew the tops off 2 buildings as engineers fought to stop a meltdown. More than 200,000 people were evacuated. The ghosts of Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island hung in the air. The nuclear alarm capped a double disaster. The quake of 9.0 magnitude was followed by a tsunami, a word that Japan gave to the world, which tore into the isolated northeast coast of the main island and was so powerful that it rippled around the Pacific Ocean to California and Chile. In stricken Sendai, smashed cars and small aircraft were jumbled against buildings near the airport several miles from the shore. Felled trees and wooden debris lay everywhere as rescue workers in boats moved through murky waters around flooded structures. And one example of the devastation was the city of Notori. Skeletons of shattered buildings, twisted links of corrugated steel, corpses with their hands twisted into claws littered the landscape. And Kansas Wesleyan students are frantically calling home. How did people on the ground respond? Perhaps not surprisingly, when people were trying to run upstairs to escape the tsunami, some mindlessly trampled fellow human beings. Some shoved old people out of the way. But others, like the Samaritan, seized upon the action of mercy. An old woman sat sitting in water that rose to her nose. Mr. Saga rushed behind her, grabbed her under the arms, hoisted her up the stairs, where another person grabbed her and lifted her to another person, spontaneously forming a human chain, lifting older residents and some children to the top. A mother shouted, "Please at least save my baby," as water rose to her chest. Mr. Saga grabbed the baby, ran up the stairs, as many at the foot of the stairs washed away. The mother, however, was able to make it to the top, where Mr. Saga put the baby into her arms. These are the actions represented in the parable that Professor Marshall just read. These are the actions of the Good Samaritan. This parable is promptly portrayed on a 13th century stained glass window in the Cathedral of Chartres in France. There are 167 such windows, each of which tells a story from the Bible or medieval Christian tradition. The windows and sculptures were designed in the 12th and 13th century, and they came to constitute a theological library for a culture of pre-literate Christians. Remember that Johannes Gutenberg did not invent the printing press until the middle of the 15th century. So the way people learned their Bible stories, the way they went to Sunday school, was to go into the cathedral and read the windows. In the 90s, a book by Joseph Jaworski piqued my curiosity about that here's the deal. You're never stuck. You're never at a dead end. You're never in a cul-de-sac. You always have options. And what you have to do is to recognize that you always have options. Then you have to recognize that the fundamental constituent of the universe is relationships. And that's true at every level. It's true at the quantum level, the macro level, and the cosmological level. And then you have to recognize that you are essential for what is supposed to unfold in this universe. And when you recognize those three things, two things will happen. You'll meet the right people, and the right doors will open. You simply have to open your eyes, recognize the open door, and walk through. And then he wrote that he visited the Cathedral of Chartres often because synchronicity was more alive in that place than any place he experienced in the world. But he didn't describe any more about why that was so. So I started visiting the cathedral, my curiosity having been piqued. What did I discover? That the Samaritan window was key because it alone told not one story, but two. And the story that the parable of the Good Samaritan was paired with was the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and then the story where Cain kills his brother Abel. And he kills his brother Abel because he's envious that God accepts Abel's offering but not Cain's, and he refuses to celebrate with his brother. He becomes so angry that his face becomes permanently deformed. So here's what the window recognizes. When a man is going from Jerusalem to Jericho, that's paired with Adam and Eve's being exiled from the Garden of Eden. When the man is beaten and robbed and left half dead, that's connected with Cain's killing his brother Abel. When the priest and the Levite crossed over, leaving the man half dead, that's paired with Cain's envy and anger towards his brother. Because you see, envy is the unwillingness to weep with those who weep. The Samaritan, taking the man on his beast and carrying him to the inn, is the solution to the problem of Adam and Eve's being exiled from the Garden of Eden. They're hiding from the presence of God. The Samaritan's placing the wounded man on the inn is connected and fulfills Adam's and Eve's being placed in the Garden of Eden in the first place. And perhaps most important is this. On the first day of school last August, Dr. Jamie Spikes said to the first-time freshmen, the most important question you can ask is, am I my brother's or my sister's keeper? Well, that's what Cain asked God. Am I my brother's keeper? The designers of the Cathedral of Chartres, that window recognized that the question, am I my brother's keeper, is transformed in the question that the lawyer asks, and who is my neighbor? And the answer to that question is who proved to be neighborly. And the answer to that question is the one who was sensitive to the action of mercy and was willing to offer that mercy and act on it to the person who was hurting. Every once in a while, someone asks, what's it mean to be a Christian university? And the answer that the parable and the window give is that the action of mercy is the deepest legacy of a Christian university and Christian learning. The action of mercy is our birthright. In 1975, a friend of ours, who also is named Paula, survived a traffic accident like our Paula And that traffic accident claimed the life of her husband and her daughter. And Paula was in the first trimester of her second pregnancy when she survived that accident. And when she learned of the deaths of her husband and her daughter, she said, I wanted to die, and I tried to figure out how to. And she said, I chewed up and spit out every chaplain, preacher, or Christian who came into my room to comfort me with their pre-packaged, memorized scripture verses that they just tried to dispense like, take an aspirin and go to bed and get over it. She said the one person who was helpful was a nurse who simply sat down on the bed next to her, put her arms around her, and cried with her. And that nurse cared for her for 10 days until she was discharged from ICU. It took Paula 7 years to come to a place where she could finally enjoy a self-evident measure of healing on the inside. And she said the occasion was when she finally came face to face with the drunk driver who smashed into their car going 100 miles an hour in the opposite direction. And she said what she learned was, when she finally faced him with an open heart, all there was that lay between them was the action of mercy and love. So 20 years later, she was sharing that story with a group in Connecticut because she had a counseling practice, a psychotherapy practice. She was frequently asked to come and give lectures on how do you come to a place where you can forgive? How do you come to a place where you can love? How do you come to a place where you can heal? And she talked about how she finally came to embrace mercy and how that brought her to a place where she could actually forgive the man who was responsible for the death of her husband and the death of her daughter. And then, as always happens with Paula, afterwards, people want to come forward and greet her and speak to her personally. She said the reception line snaked all the way out of the room. And she said after an hour, there was a woman at the end of the line who had braces on both of her arms. And she said the braces looked so heavy, and I just wish she would sit down. And it took a second hour for the woman to get to the place where she last in line could speak to Paula personally. And when she spoke to Paula, she said, well, you made it. And Paula was a little confused, and she said, yes. And then Paula said, forgive me, but you speak to me with such recognition. Have we met before? And the woman said, Paula, I'm the nurse who cared for you those 10 days when you were in the ICU. You were delivered into my arms, and I was the one who had the honor of caring for you. And I prayed for you every day, and I hoped you would make it, but I knew there were no guarantees. I knew simply that it was my responsibility to care for you and hold you in the arms of love, and to hold you in prayer each day since. Paula said she and the nurse wept, but it was on the way home that she had to pull the car over for the gut-wrenching tears that made it impossible to drive. And she said what hit her was that even then, even in the midst of blinding, understandable anger, the action of mercy of one person began a journey of difficult healing for Paula. And that action of mercy is our birthright. The parable of the Good Samaritan and the story of Adam and Eve are embedded in the cathedral in Chartres, just as they are embedded must recognize that there is a propensity for temptation, rebellion, and violence that is at large in the world and sometimes in us. At the very least, all of us can be up to no good at least some of the time. Envy and violence are a part of the world in which we live. They confront us with decisions that require our response every day. But just as envy and violence plague us, so is the action of mercy an ever-present possibility, albeit more subtle, because it is inherently kind. The Good Samaritan is artistically embedded in the walls of the cathedral just beneath the first man, the first woman, and the first siblings. The cathedral involves the recognition that the action of mercy is even deeper and more ubiquitous than our propensity for self-interest, envy, and violence. The action of mercy is our richest legacy. It is there for the taking. It is the foundation on which life becomes fully human and in which we rise to the full stature of human excellence and goodness. The action of mercy is the deepest legacy and the wisest choice. But lest God compromise the dignity of our humanity, he does not foist mercy on us. He leaves the choice to us. The action of mercy is authentic to the degree and only to the degree that it is chosen freely, without compulsion. The choice is ours. It is entirely ours. But the benefits are a source of never-ending wonder. The people of Japan who helped their sister and brother human beings during the earthquake and the tsunami chose the action of mercy. So did Paula D'Arcy's nurse. So did Paula Ho's. And now it's up to us. Today marks the commencement of your life as an alumna or alumnus of Kansas Wesleyan University. Our legacy is the action of mercy. The choice is ours. What will you choose?